A quiet marine biology teacher from Anaheim once drew a small comic book about tide pools to teach kids about the ocean. That little comic book grew into one of the most successful cartoons in television history. SpongeBob SquarePants has been on the air for over 25 years, has aired more than 300 episodes, has produced 4 movies, a Broadway musical, and a brand worth billions. The world inside the show is built with more care than almost any other kids' cartoon ever made. A pineapple house, a stone head next door, a restaurant shaped like a fishing trap, a torn recipe, a war veteran with a daughter who is a whale, a tiny green copepod with a wife built out of an old calculator. But underneath the bright, cheerful surface, the show has been carrying something much darker since the very first episode. Pulled segments, banned episodes, a confirmed end-of-the-world origin, a scary fan story the show itself later winked back at. Tonight, we walk slowly through all of it. Welcome to Cartoonology. Let's get started. The quiet marine biologist who built an empire underwater. To understand SpongeBob SquarePants, you have to start with the man who built it. And the man who built it almost did not become an animator at all. His name was Stephen McDaniel Hillenburg. He was born on August 21st, 1961, on a United States Army base in Lawton, Oklahoma, where his father worked for the military. The family did not stay there long. When Stephen was about a year old, they moved to Anaheim, California, where his father started a new career as a draftsman and designer in the aerospace industry, and his mother taught visually impaired students. By the time Stephen was old enough to remember the world around him, the desert and the army base were gone, and Southern California, with its long coastline and its endless string of beaches, was home. He was not a loud child. By his own description, he was probably well-meaning and a little naive, like a lot of kids are. He liked drawing. He liked the ocean. He liked watching the films of Jacques Cousteau, the French oceanographer whose deep voice and slow underwater documentaries shaped a generation of marine science fans. Years later, when SpongeBob SquarePants needed a narrator, Hillenburg would parody Cousteau directly. The French narrator, with his slow opening line about Bikini Bottom, is in many ways the older man's voice, tucked permanently into the show. When Stephen was 15, he went snorkeling for the first time on a school dive program at Woods Cove in Laguna Beach, and something in him locked into place. He would later describe it as a switch clicking. He decided he wanted to be a marine biologist, but he also wanted to be an artist, and he was not yet sure he had to pick one. Some of his high school teachers, knowing about both of his interests, gave him advice that he found unsatisfying. They told him he should just draw fish. To Stephen, drawing fish for a living sounded boring. He was more interested in making weird little paintings, and he kept doing both, the science track and the art track, side by side. In the summers after high school, before he went to college, he took a job that would sit in his memory for the rest of his life. He worked as a fry cook and a lobster boiler at a fast food seafood restaurant in Maine. The job was greasy and hot and not glamorous in any way, but the staff would dress up as pirates and sing songs to entertain young customers. And one of those songs included the first 2 lines of what would, decades later, become the SpongeBob theme song. The Krusty Krab, in its earliest cellular form, was already alive in his real life before it was ever a cartoon. The character of SpongeBob, as a fry cook in a stained apron behind a grill, was being seeded inside his memory long before he ever picked up a pen. He chose the science path first. He went to Humboldt State University in Arcata, California, and graduated in 1984 with a degree in natural resource planning and interpretation, with an emphasis on marine resources. After graduation, he took a job at the Orange County Marine Institute in Dana Point, which is now known as the Ocean Institute. His job was to teach marine biology to children. He led tide pool walks. He talked about diversity and adaptation. He worked staff art on the side, and he watched every day how absolutely fascinated children were with the small, strange creatures that lived in the rocky crevices along the California coastline. He stayed there for 3 years. During that time, an educational director asked him if he would be interested in writing a comic book for the children who came through the institute, something that could teach them about tide pool ecology in a more accessible way. Stephen said yes. He went home and made a comic book called The Intertidal Zone. It featured anthropomorphic sea creatures, walking and talking, hosted by a character named Bob the Sponge. Bob the Sponge looked like an actual sea sponge, soft and round and a little weird, not at all like the kitchen sponge that would come later. The comic was strange and funny, and clearly the work of someone who loved the subject too much to be bored by it. Children loved it. Stephen tried to find a publisher who would print it as a real comic book. No publisher said yes. The comic stayed inside the institute, used as a teaching tool, and Stephen kept teaching, and slowly, over the next 2 years, he started to feel a quiet shift inside himself. He liked teaching, he loved the ocean, but what he was actually best at, what kept him up at night, was the drawing. In 1987, he made a decision that to many people in his life seemed a little reckless. He left the institute. He went back to school. He enrolled at the California Institute of the Arts in Valencia in their experimental animation program on the strength of the intertidal zone, which his teacher Jules Engel saw and liked. He earned his Master of Fine Arts in 1992. While he was at Cal Arts, he made 2 short animated films. The first was The Green Beret, a cartoon about a Girl Scout with enormous fists trying to sell cookies. The second was Wormholes, a more philosophical short based on the theory of relativity, which won an award for Best Concept at the Ottawa International Animation Festival. At that festival, Stephen met an animator named Joe Murray, who had just been hired by Nickelodeon to make a series called Rocko's Modern Life. Joe Murray offered Stephen a job. From 1993 to 1996, Stephen worked on Rocko's Modern Life, eventually becoming a creative director on the series. While he was there, he kept thinking about the intertidal zone, the comic he had made years earlier in Dana Point. One of the writers on Rocko's Modern Life, a man named Martin Olson, read the comic and told Stephen something that would change the trajectory of his entire life. Olson told him he should make it into a TV show. Stephen, having watched Joe Murray pull his hair out trying to keep Rocko's Modern Life on the air, had previously sworn he would never run his own show. But Olson kept pushing. Slowly, Stephen started to listen. He went home and he opened a notebook and he started to redesign Bob the Sponge. The first thing he changed was the shape. The natural sea sponge was too soft, too organic, too easy to overlook. He sketched a kitchen sponge instead, square and rigid and cheerful, and the moment he drew it, he later said, it just looked funny. The square shape made the character. He added gapped front teeth, modeled on his own childhood photos, where his teeth had a similar gap. He added a white shirt, a red tie, and brown square pants. He named the character SpongeBoy. The original pitch was for a series called SpongeBoy Ahoy. He recorded a 7-minute pilot with that name. Then, late in the process, the legal team discovered that SpongeBoy was already trademarked by a mop company. Stephen had to change the name. He kept the word sponge because he was afraid that without it, children would mistake the character for a piece of cheese. He swapped the second part for Bob with SquarePants as a kind of family name. The series became SpongeBob SquarePants. He pitched the idea to Nickelodeon executives in 1997. He famously brought a fish tank to the meeting, set it on a table, and let the executives meet the characters as he moved figurines around inside it. The executives wanted some changes. They wanted SpongeBob to be a child who went to school. Stephen wanted SpongeBob to be an adult. The compromise they reached was Mrs. Puff and her boating school, where SpongeBob, as a working adult, attends a kind of permanent driver's education class he can never quite pass. That compromise alone created one of the most enduring running gags in the entire show. The pilot for SpongeBob SquarePants aired on May 1st, 1999, as a preview after the Kids' Choice Awards. The first segment was Help Wanted. The second was Reef Blowers. The third was Tea at the Tree Dome, which introduced Sandy Cheeks. From that night forward, Stephen Hillenburg's life was no longer his own. The show became one of the most popular animated series in television history. Hillenburg ran it through 3 seasons. In 2002, he stepped back as showrunner to focus on the first feature film, which he intended to be the proper ending of the series. Nickelodeon had other plans. The show kept going, and Hillenburg returned later in life, working on the second movie and contributing to many of the episodes that would air after his death. In 2017, he announced that he had been diagnosed with amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, a degenerative motor neuron disease. He kept working on the show as long as he could. He died on November 26, 2018, at the age of 57, at his home in San Marino, California. His ashes were sprinkled off the coast of Los Angeles County, returned to the ocean he had spent his whole life loving. The show he left behind was always, at its heart, about that ocean. Hillenburg used to say that he hoped people who watched SpongeBob would notice the plankton, the crabs, the starfish, and want to take care of the seas a little more. He hated the merchandising. He once told a colleague that his biggest nightmare was finding one of the SpongeBob plush dolls washed up on a beach like garbage. The man who built the funniest yellow sponge in the history of children's television had, underneath everything, the soul of a marine biologist who simply wanted children to look more closely at tide pools. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The story of how Stephen Hillenburg's quiet years inside a tide pool comic book turned into a multi-billion-dollar animated empire is the foundation of everything that comes next. But the world he built was even stranger than the man who built it. Bikini Bottom is not a random underwater city. It sits, by design, beneath a real and very dark place on the world map, and almost every detail of its architecture, its geography, and its physics is rooted in something specific that Hillenburg knew from his marine biology days. In the next section, we walk slowly through the city itself, the pineapple, the rock, the moai head, the muffler houses, and the strange real-world atoll the show is named after. Section 2, the birth of Bikini Bottom and the pineapple under the sea. Bikini Bottom, the underwater city where SpongeBob lives, is the most carefully built throwaway joke in animation history. The city has rules. It has a coastline. It has a downtown. It has neighborhoods. It has a public transportation system, a school system, a justice system, a sports league, a music scene, a food culture, a tourism industry, and a long, slow descent into a place called Rock Bottom that is treated as a separate city entirely. None of this had to be there. The show could have just been 3 or 4 houses and a restaurant, and it would still have been funny. But Stephen Hillenburg was a marine biologist, and marine biologists do not build half-worlds. Once he started, he could not stop, and the city he ended up creating is one of the most fully realized fictional places ever produced for a children's program. The city sits, by intention, in a very specific place on the real map of the world. The opening of every episode begins with the French narrator saying that we are in Bikini Bottom, and the location is not a coincidence. Bikini Bottom is named after Bikini Atoll, a real coral reef in the Marshall Islands made up of 23 small islands in the central Pacific Ocean. The name is a quiet pun. The atoll is called Bikini. The underwater city is at the bottom of the sea beneath it, so it is Bikini Bottom. But the joke also carries a much heavier history that the show, in its early seasons, played with openly and then walked away from for many years, before a longtime writer finally confirmed it on the record. We will return to that history in the second half of this video. For now, what matters is that Hillenburg picked the location on purpose. He could have made up a name. He could have invented an underwater geography of his own. He chose a real one, a famous one, and one that, to anyone who knows the history of the Pacific in the 20th century, carries a very specific weight. The geography of the city, once you start mapping it, is layered. SpongeBob's house is at 124 Conch Street, a pineapple-shaped home that sits between 2 of the most recognizable houses in animation. To the right is Squidward's house, a tall, stone, Easter Island moai head. To the left is Patrick's house, which is not really a house at all, but a flat gray rock with a small dirt floor underneath it and a television set mounted in the dirt. The 3 houses are arranged in a line, with the smallest, weirdest one in the middle, which is the visual joke that defines the entire neighborhood. SpongeBob is the cheerful absurdity that lives between the moai head and the rock. The 3 houses are also a very deliberate piece of writing about the 3 personalities: sincere joy in the middle, dry artistic frustration on one side, and oblivious contentment on the other. The pineapple was Hillenburg's idea, and it was driven by a marine biology principle. Hillenburg wanted SpongeBob to live in something that did not look like a normal house, because real sea sponges live attached to coral and other surfaces, and an upside-down pineapple, with its strange, hollow inside and its bright color, gave the character a home that would never be mistaken for a human dwelling. The pineapple has multiple levels inside, including a kitchen, a living room, a bedroom upstairs, and a bathroom. Gary the snail lives there too, and there is a long tradition in the show of treating Gary as a cat, even though Gary is a sea snail with the meow of a domestic shorthair. That pet relationship, the snail as cat, is one of the cleanest examples of how Hillenburg built the show. He took a real ocean creature, applied a slightly absurd human framework to it, and then played the result completely straight. Squidward's moai head, the tall stone face that sits on Conch Street, is a reference to the famous statues on Easter Island. The choice fits Squidward's character. He is a self-important would-be artist, and a stone head with a permanently disappointed expression is exactly the kind of dwelling a Squidward would choose. The interior of his house is full of self-portraits, paintings of his own face, sculptures of his own face, busts of his own face. The visual gag is layered. Squidward lives inside a stone face, and the inside of the stone face face is filled with more faces of the same person. Patrick's rock is the simplest of the three. It is the kind of joke that an 8-year-old would invent. Patrick is a starfish. Starfish live under rocks in real tide pools, and Patrick lives under a rock in Bikini Bottom. The rock has a flat top, a flat bottom, and a small crawl space underneath where Patrick sleeps and watches television. Hillenburg's marine biology background is sitting right there on the screen. Real starfish, when you flip them over, have surprisingly complicated mouth and feeding structures, and the species is famous for being slow, but actually quite aggressive when it needs to be. Patrick, as a character, is exactly that. He looks slow and dim and harmless, and most of the time he is, but there are episodes throughout the show's run where Patrick suddenly becomes incredibly strong, incredibly fast, or incredibly cruel, and the show treats these moments not as breaks in his character, but as glimpses of what a starfish actually is when the rock is removed. Beyond the three houses, the city expands. The Krusty Krab restaurant, where SpongeBob works as a fry cook, is built inside the body of an old fishing trap, a kind of crab-shaped wooden structure with a chimney and a roof. Across the street is the Chum Bucket, the failed restaurant owned by Plankton and Karen, built inside the body of an actual metal bucket with a giant arm on the roof. The two restaurants face each other directly, which is part of the running joke. The most successful restaurant in town and the worst restaurant in town are neighbors, and they have been at war for decades. There is also the Bikini Bottom Mall, where Pearl works at a clothing store. There is the Goofy Goober ice cream parlor. There is Mrs. Puff's boating school, where SpongeBob takes his driving lessons and crashes his boatmobile every single time. There is a hospital, a police station, a jail, a courthouse, an art museum, a bowling alley, a movie theater, a sports stadium, and a public park. The transportation system in Bikini Bottom is one of the most quietly clever pieces of world building in the show. The residents of the city drive boatmobiles, which are exactly what the name suggests. They are small motorboats that drive on the underwater ground like cars. The roads are roads. The traffic lights work. There are stop signs and crosswalks and parking lots, and the boatmobiles are treated like cars in every way that matters. The show never explains how a boat is supposed to drive on the bottom of the ocean. It just commits to the joke completely, and after a few episodes, the audience accepts that this is simply how Bikini Bottom works. Outside the main city, the geography keeps expanding. There is Goo Lagoon, the local beach, where the residents go to sunbathe, even though they are already underwater. The beach has a real lifeguard tower, real sand, real volleyball games, and bubbly water that the show treats as a separate kind of liquid that you cannot breathe, even though everyone in the city is already breathing water. There is Jellyfish Fields, a hilly grassland area where giant jellyfish float around, producing a substance called jelly that SpongeBob treats as a kind of underwater honey. He hunts them with a net and a jar, in a direct parody of butterfly hunters in old cartoons. There is Sandy Cheeks' Tree Dome, a glass dome in the middle of the city that is filled with air and a real tree, where Sandy lives because she is a squirrel from Texas and cannot breathe underwater without a suit. We will get to her in section 5. Then there is Rock Bottom. Rock Bottom is a separate city, located far below Bikini Bottom in a deep underwater trench. The episode that introduces it is one of the strangest pieces of children's television ever produced. SpongeBob and Patrick accidentally take a bus there after a day at Glove World. Rock Bottom is dark. The residents are deep-sea creatures. The language is nearly incomprehensible because of how the dialogue is treated, and SpongeBob spends the entire episode unable to leave because the bus schedule and the rules of the city seem to actively work against him. The episode ends with him escaping in a hot air balloon. There is a fan theory, which we will return to in the second half of this video, that Rock Bottom is built inside the literal crater left by an underwater nuclear blast. The geography of the city in that reading is not just architecture, it is history. The architecture of the residential neighborhoods is dominated by mufflers. Most of the houses in Bikini Bottom are shaped like car mufflers, with a long cylindrical body and round openings. This is one of those details that is easy to miss the first time you watch the show, but once you see it, you cannot stop seeing it. The houses are mufflers, the lampposts are anchors, the fire hydrants are oxygen tanks, the mailboxes are old diving helmets. The entire city, when you look closely, is built out of the kind of debris that would settle on the ocean floor if a coastal community above the surface were to be wiped out. Hillenburg never said this directly in any interview I have been able to find, but the design is so consistent that it cannot be accidental. The city of Bikini Bottom is built out of the bones of a human world, and the residents residents have made homes inside the wreckage. Above the city, the surface exists, and the show is inconsistent about how to treat it. In some episodes, the residents go to the surface and meet humans, like David Hasselhoff, who carries SpongeBob and Patrick across the ocean in the first feature film. In other episodes, the surface is treated as a kind of mythological place where dangerous things live, and being pulled up by a fishing hook is a horror story that fish parents tell their children. The show never resolves this contradiction. It just lets both versions exist at the same time, and the audience accepts it because the audience accepts everything in Bikini Bottom. What makes the city work in the end is that it feels lived in. Hillenburg did not just build a setting, he built a community. The residents have jobs, families, hobbies, and grudges that last across episodes. Old Man Jenkins shows up in dozens of episodes as the cranky elderly local. The tattletale strangler stalks SpongeBob across an entire half hour. The Bikini Bottom news anchor, Hirsch Perkins, appears in dozens of episodes covering the latest crisis. The city has a population that has names, faces, and recurring storylines, and the longer you watch, the more you start to recognize the same fish in the background of unrelated scenes. Hillenburg built a world, and then trusted the world to do the heavy lifting for him. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The city Hillenburg designed sits on top of 3 central locations, and one of those locations carries more weight than all the others combined. The Krusty Krab is more than a restaurant. It is the economic engine of the city, the spiritual center of SpongeBob's life, and the stage where the show's most important relationships, including the lost friendship between Mr. Krabs and Plankton, were forged and shattered. In the next section, we walk through the full canon of how the Krusty Krab came to exist, the secret formula it was built around, and the day Plankton and Mr. Krabs went from best friends to lifelong enemies over a piece of paper torn in half. Section 3. The Krusty Krab, the Krabby Patty, and the friendship that built both. The Krusty Krab is the most important building in Bikini Bottom. It is where SpongeBob works. It is where the show's central economic engine sits. It is where Squidward suffers. It is where Mr. Krabs counts his money. And it is the place that the residents of Bikini Bottom orbit around as if it were the spiritual center of their entire underwater world. In the second feature film, when Plankton finally steals the secret formula and the patties stop being made, Mr. Krabs delivers a line that the show treats with full seriousness. He says that the Krabby Patty is what ties the city together, and that without it, there will be a complete breakdown of social order. The line is played for comedy, but the writers were not entirely joking. The Krusty Krab really is the heart of the city, and its origin story is more layered than almost any other piece of canon in the entire show. To understand the Krusty Krab, you have to understand that the building itself was not built to be a restaurant. According to the Krusty Krab training video, which aired in May 2002 as one of the most beloved episodes of the 3rd season, the structure was originally a retirement home that had gone bankrupt. The narrator of the training video, voiced by guest actor Steve Kahela, walks viewers through the history with the calm, slightly condescending tone of an industrial corporate orientation tape. The retirement home went out of business. Mr. Krabs, who had recently come back from war and had spent a long stretch of time in what the narrator describes as a deep depression that seemed endless, eventually decided to buy the abandoned building and turn it into a restaurant. The episode shows him alone in a darkened room with a bottle on a nightstand, looking exhausted, and then it shows him slowly rebuilding, painting the sign, hanging the menu, and opening the doors. It is one of the quietest pieces of writing the show has ever produced, and it sits inside an otherwise comedic episode about how to operate a cash register. The shape of the building is not a coincidence. The Krusty Krab is built to look like a wooden lobster trap. It has wooden slats, a curved roof, a chimney, and a door shaped like an opening in the trap. The choice is layered. Mr. Krabs is a crab. The food sold inside is named after him. The building is a trap. The residents of Bikini Bottom walk willingly into a place named after the predator who runs it, where a food named after that same predator is sold, and they line up around the block to do it. The visual joke is so quiet that most viewers never register it consciously, but Hillenburg, with his marine biology background, almost certainly designed it on purpose. The food that built the restaurant is the Krabby Patty, and the secret formula behind it is the longest-running mystery in the show. According to SpongeBob's recipe card in the Season 1 episode Pickles, the visible ingredients of a Krabby Patty include a top bun, a bottom bun, a patty, lettuce, cheese, onions, tomatoes, ketchup, mustard, and pickles. None of those are secret. What is secret is what is inside the patty itself, and what is in the small glass bottle that Mr. Krabs keeps locked in a safe inside the restaurant. The bottle is sealed with a cork. The recipe is written on a piece of paper rolled up inside it. In the episode Plankton's Army, Squidward casually reveals that the bottle is sometimes kept under Mr. Krabs' mattress at home. In later episodes, it is kept in the safe behind the manager's desk. In the episode Friendiversary, the show reveals that SpongeBob is actually the only one who knows the combination to the safe, and he keeps the combination tied to a memory of one of his earliest experiences with Squidward. When that memory is erased, SpongeBob forgets the combination, and the formula is briefly inaccessible even to the people who own it. Stephen Hillenburg made one specific decision about the formula that has shaped how every writer has handled it for over 25 years. He decided, very early on, that the patty would contain no meat at all. According to longtime animator and producer Vincent Waller, who has been involved with the show across most of its run, the Krabby Patty contains absolutely no meat and no animal product. Mr. Lawrence, the writer and the voice of Plankton, has confirmed the same thing in interviews. The writers are not even allowed to depict fish being eaten as food in most contexts. The show treats fish as people, not as ingredients, and the patty is designed to fit inside that rule. Hillenburg conceived of the Krabby Patty as a vegetable-based burger, which is part of why fans got so frustrated in 2024 when Wendy's announced a Krabby Patty collab promotion that used the chain's signature beef burger, in direct contradiction to the canon Hillenburg had spent decades building. Hillenburg, who had died in 2018, had spent his life pushing back against the merchandising of the show, and the use of his characters to sell beef in a fast food chain was something many fans felt he would have personally hated. The actual ingredients that have been confirmed in the show, in fragments across many episodes, are vague on purpose. In the episode The Great Patty Caper, 3 ingredients are confirmed. The patty contains flour, barnacle shavings, and turmeric. In the episode SpongeBob on Parade, salt is named as one of the ingredients. In the episode Krabby Road, the formula is briefly visible on screen, but the ingredients listed there are written in deliberate gibberish. Vincent Waller confirmed in a Twitter reply that the gibberish was intentional, written specifically so that no audience member could ever decode the recipe. The writers do not want the secret to be solved, and they have never wanted it solved. The mystery is the point. Beyond the recipe, the Krusty Krab has its own internal mythology. There is a patty vault inside the restaurant, revealed in the Season 3 episode Just One Bite, which contains a massive stockpile of Krabby Patties stacked from floor to ceiling. The same episode also reveals that Krabby Patties are addictive. Squidward, who has spent years insisting he hates the patties, eats just one and falls into a kind of obsessive frenzy, stealing dozens of them in the middle of the night and being caught by a hidden security system. The episode treats the addiction as a comedic plot device, but the implication, especially in light of later episodes, is that there is something inside the patty that is genuinely chemically compelling. The show plays with this idea repeatedly. The first feature film treats the patties as so essential that when the recipe is stolen, the city falls into an open dystopia within days. In Sponge Out of Water, similar themes return, with Mr. Krabs declaring that civilization itself depends on the recipe staying inside the restaurant. How the recipe came into being is the deepest piece of canon the show has ever produced, and it was revealed in one specific episode, the Season 5 premiere, Friend or Foe, which aired on April 13th, 2007. The episode is built as a flashback. After yet another failed attempt by Plankton to steal the secret formula, SpongeBob asks Mr. Krabs why the two of them hate each other so much. Mr. Krabs sits down with a heavy expression on his face, and, for the first time in the show's history, tells the truth. Mr. Krabs and Plankton, according to Friend or Foe, were born on the same day in the same hospital. They grew up together. They were inseparable as children. Both of them were outcasts. Plankton was bullied for being a nerd because he was already showing signs of being scientifically gifted. Mr. Krabs was bullied for being extremely poor. The local bullies, led by a fish named Billy, mocked them constantly. Mr. Krabs lived in such poverty that, in one early flashback, he is shown wearing a cardboard box because his actual clothes were stolen by Old Man Jenkins, who was using them to clean his car. The two boys spent their childhoods together as the only two people in their school who understood each other. They went to a local hangout called Stinky Burgers, Krabs, a fast food joint located on top of a literal landfill. The owner, Stinky, refused to serve them. He told them that freaks like them were bad for business. That moment in the flashback is the original wound. Plankton and Mr. Krabs decided that day to build their own burger restaurant, a place that would serve everyone, that would be better than Stinky's, and that would make them respected in their town. They opened a place called Plab's Burgers, located in the same dump where Stinky's had been operating. They made their first patty together, and they served it to Old Man Jenkins as their first customer. Jenkins took one bite of the burger and collapsed. The patty was poisonous. He was knocked unconscious, and the implication is that he genuinely died from the experience. Though, in true SpongeBob fashion, Jenkins shows up alive in later episodes anyway. The collapse of Old Man Jenkins triggered the moment that ended the friendship. Plankton accused Mr. Krabs of tainting the patty. Mr. Krabs accused Plankton of tainting the patty. They began to fight. They grabbed the recipe, the original handwritten formula, and they each pulled at one end of the paper. The recipe ripped in half. Plankton ended up with the smaller half, which read only the words and a pinch of chum. Mr. Krabs ended up with the larger half. As they continued to fight, a shelf in the kitchen was knocked over. A pile of unrelated ingredients fell into the patty batter. The combination of those ingredients, by complete accident, created the actual Krabby Patty as it exists today. The recipe was not engineered. It was the result of an argument between two best friends who were tearing each other apart in a dump and a falling shelf that nobody planned for. The episode handles this with surprising emotional weight. Karen, Plankton's wife, eventually intervenes in the present day and tells SpongeBob the real version of the story, because Mr. Krabs and Plankton each tell competing, self-flattering versions first. By the time the truth is revealed, the audience understands that the entire economic structure of Bikini Bottom is built on the wreckage of a childhood friendship that died over a poisoned hamburger, and the rivalry that powers the show is not actually about money. It is about two people who used to love each other and never recovered from the day they tore a piece of paper down the middle. Mr. Krabs took his half of the recipe and built the Krusty Krab. The bankrupt retirement home was waiting for him. The pieces of his life came together. He had the cooking skills from his pirate years and his Navy years. He had the trauma from the war that had left him in a deep depression. He had the small fortune from selling his old ship. He had the half of the recipe that contained the actual secret. He bought the building, painted the sign, hung the menu, and opened the doors. Plankton, with his half of the recipe that read only and a pinch of chum, opened the chum bucket directly across the street and tried to make the patty work without the missing ingredients. The chum bucket has never had more than a handful of customers in the entire run of the series. Plankton has spent the rest of his life trying to steal back the half of the paper he lost in that childhood fight, and Mr. Krabs has spent the rest of his life keeping it locked in a glass bottle behind a safe. The Krusty Krab, when you look at it that way, is not really a restaurant. It is a monument to a broken friendship, built inside the body of a fishing trap, on top of the bones of a retirement home, in a city that sits beneath a real-world nuclear test site. Every Krabby Patty served inside it is a piece of that history. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The story of how the Krusty Krab came to be is also, in its own way, the story of the man who runs it. But Mr. Krabs himself has a history that goes much deeper than a torn recipe and an abandoned retirement home. He is a war veteran, a former pirate, a single father, the husband of a woman the show has never been willing to draw, and the biological or adoptive father of a teenage whale. In the next section, we walk slowly through the full canon of Eugene H. Krabs, from his birth in 1942 to the empty room in the Krusty Krab training video, and the unanswered question at the center of his family that Stephen Hillenburg refused to ever solve. Section 4. The Unlikely Family of Eugene H. Krabs. Eugene Harold Krabs is one of the strangest main characters in any long-running children's animated show, and the strangeness is built into his canon in layers. He is a crab. He runs a restaurant. He has a teenage daughter who is a whale. He served in a military conflict that the show has never named. He suffered through what the show treats with unusual seriousness as a long, deep depression. He once lived in such extreme poverty that he had to wear a cardboard box for clothing. He is the friend who turned into the enemy of Plankton over a torn recipe. He is the man who took in Pearl when her mother disappeared, and the man Stephen Hillenburg refused until the day he died to allow the writers to ever fully explain. His full name is Eugene H. Krabs, and the H stands for Harold, according to the SpongeBob SquarePants Trading Cards Premiere Edition. His birthday is November 30th, 1942, the same day as Planktons, and the two of them were born in the same hospital. The 1942 birth date matters because it places Mr. Krabs' young adulthood directly inside the era of the Vietnam War, which ran from 1955 to 1975, and that timing has fueled one of the most enduring fan readings of his character. The show has been very careful to never name the specific war that Mr. Krabs fought in. The Krusty Krab training video uses only the phrase, "the war," with no further detail, but the way the episode treats his return, with the line about a deep depression that seemed endless, and the visual of him alone in a dark room with what appears to be a bottle next to him, is a direct echo of how American culture has portrayed Vietnam veterans returning home with post-traumatic stress disorder. The Navy past is canon. It is referenced in multiple episodes. In Shell of a Man, his old Navy buddies come to visit him, and the show takes a slightly darker tone than usual. One of his Navy friends has a torpedo permanently lodged in his torso. Another has an iron eye, suggesting that his real eye was lost in combat. Another walks with a permanent limp. They are all cheerful about it, in the way that real veterans sometimes are when they reunite, but the implications are heavy. These are men who saw something. The episode treats Mr. Krabs as the host, and his shame about the loss of his physical shell, which is what the episode is actually about, is layered with a quieter shame about what he and his friends went through together in their younger years. In The Krusty Sponge, Mr. Krabs talks about having had the 1,000-yard stare during his service days. The phrase is a real military term for the unfocused, distant gaze that traumatized soldiers develop after extended combat. The show uses the phrase as a one-line joke. Anyone who knows what it actually refers to knows that the joke is not really a joke. Before the Navy, according to canon revealed in episodes like Pull Up a Barrel and Grandpappy the Pirate, Mr. Krabs had a career as a pirate, or at least as someone who tried to live a pirate's life on a ship that he eventually had to sell. The pirate background is part of why his accent is what it is. His voice actor, Clancy Brown, modeled the voice on a slight Scottish lilt, layered on top of the original direction Hillenburg gave him, which was to play the character as a former manager Hillenburg had worked under at a seafood restaurant in his earlier life. That manager, according to Hillenburg, was redheaded, muscular, and a former army cook, and his strong Maine accent had reminded Hillenburg of an old pirate. The character of Mr. Krabs is, in many ways, a fictionalized portrait of that manager, combined with every greedy boss Hillenburg had ever had. The greed is exaggerated to the point of cartoon insanity, but it sits on top of a real person, which is why it never quite reads as completely artificial. The childhood of Mr. Krabs, as established in Friend or Foe and reinforced across many other flashback episodes, was defined by extreme poverty. He grew up with a single mother named Betsy in the canonical reveal during Friend or Foe. His father is rarely mentioned. The lack of a father is one of the quiet aches in his backstory that the show occasionally returns to. The poverty was severe enough that in flashbacks, he is shown in clothes made from rags, or, in one infamous moment, naked except for a cardboard box, because his actual clothing had been taken by a neighbor for use as cleaning rags. That moment, played as a comedic flashback, also functions as a quiet explanation for everything the audience knows about Mr. Krabs as an adult. His obsession with money, his refusal to spend even a single penny when he can avoid it, his willingness to do almost anything for profit. All of it traces back to a childhood where money was simply not available, and where the absence of it determined how his neighbors treated him every single day. The first dollar he ever earned is a recurring artifact in the show. It hangs in a frame on the wall in his house. In the episode Wet Painters, the entire plot is driven by SpongeBob and Patrick accidentally putting a paint stain on that dollar, and Mr. Krabs' reaction is genuine horror. He treats the loss of that dollar as if it were the loss of a family member. The first dollar is, in his internal world, a kind of relic. It is the moment when his life as a poor, bullied child began to change, and it is the foundation on which the entire Krusty Krab eventually got built. The marriage of Mr. Krabs is the canonical mystery that Stephen Hillenburg refused to solve. According to the SpongeBob SquarePants trivia book, written in 2000 by former episode writer David Fain, Pearl is biologically Mr. Krabs' daughter, and the line in the trivia book has Mr. Krabs say that Pearl is a whale because she takes after her mother. The implication of that line is that there was, at some point, a Mrs. Krabs, and that Mrs. Krabs was a whale. She has never been seen seen on screen. She has never been named directly in any episode. She has never been confirmed as living, dead, or simply absent. According to current showrunner Vincent Waller, Hillenburg received hundreds of letters over the years from fans asking for an episode that would explain Pearl's origin. A plot outline for that episode was actually written and entered early development during season 5. Hillenburg shut it down. He told the writers that Pearl's origin was not something the show should ever explain, and the episode was shelved. The decision was permanent. Hillenburg never changed his mind, and after his death, the writers have continued to honor his refusal. The naming of Pearl is, in itself, a piece of indirect canon. Mr. Krabs uses the phrase "mother of pearl" as a recurring exclamation throughout the series. He says it whenever he is shocked. The phrase is a real expression in English, referring to the iridescent inner shell of certain mollusks, but inside the show, it carries a second meaning. Pearl is named for a mother that no one ever sees, and every time Mr. Krabs says the words "mother of pearl," he is, in a quiet way, invoking the mother of his own daughter. Hillenburg confirmed that the homage was intentional. The decision to portray Pearl as motherless was not a continuity error. It was a structural choice baked into her name from the very beginning of the series. The relationship between Mr. Krabs and Pearl is one of the most tender pieces of writing in the show, and one of the most quietly contradictory. Mr. Krabs is a man defined by his obsession with money, but Pearl is the one thing in his life that he consistently spends money on, even when he hates spending it. He throws her a birthday party in Whale of a Birthday, and goes to extreme lengths, eventually, to make sure it is a real one. He puts up with her constant requests for shopping money. He tolerates her noise, her tantrums, and her teenage moods. In Pearl's bedroom, she keeps photos and trophies, and the kind of clutter you would expect from any teenage girl. In a banner shown in Whale of a Birthday, Krabs reveals that he has had the banner since the day she was born. The line is small, but it is one of the few places where the show explicitly confirms that Pearl was raised by Mr. Krabs from infancy, which contradicts most adoption-based fan readings. The shape of Mr. Krabs as a character has evolved across the show's run, and the evolution has not always been kind. In the early seasons, he is a cheap, eccentric, slightly underhanded businessman. He cuts corners. He underpays Squidward. He pays SpongeBob in counterfeit money in some later episodes, which is its own controversy. In the later seasons, especially after the first feature film, his greed begins to tip into something darker. He becomes willing to risk other people's lives for money. He becomes willing to dispose of bodies. In the episode Nasty Patty, when he believes the health inspector has died, he becomes willing to torment Plankton until Plankton lays down on a road to be hit by a bus. In the episode One Course Meal, which we will return to in the Dark Secrets section of this video, the character of Mr. Krabs has, across more than 2 decades, slowly slid from a cheerful penny pincher into something closer to a cartoon sociopath, and the show has occasionally seemed aware that the slide was happening, and occasionally seemed not to notice at all. The thing that holds him together, in canon, is Pearl. Whenever the show wants to remind the audience that Mr. Krabs is still a person rather than a monster, it puts him next to Pearl. He becomes softer around her. His greed disappears, or at least quiets down. His voice changes. He calls her Cupcake and his little girl, and the audience is reminded that the same Krab who would underpay SpongeBob a nickel is also the father who has been standing in the doorway of a child's bedroom for 16 years, waiting to make sure she falls asleep safely. The contradiction is the character. The Mr. Krabs who runs the Krusty Krab and the Mr. Krabs who tucks Pearl in at night are, somehow, the same person, and the show has spent 25 years refusing to flatten that contradiction into something simpler. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The story of Mr. Krabs is the story of a man who built a family out of the wreckage of a war, a broken friendship, and a marriage that the show has never been willing to draw. But the friendship he broke did not end with his half of the recipe. Plankton walked out of that dump with the smaller half of the paper, the words and a pinch of chum, and a quiet rage that has lasted his entire adult life. He went home, he built himself a wife out of a calculator and a pile of wires, and he opened a failed restaurant directly across the street from the man who had been his best friend. In the next section, we walk through the full canon of Plankton, Karen, the outer edges of Bikini Bottom, and the Texan squirrel in a glass dome, who somehow ended up as part of this strange underwater family. Section 5, the Plankton Karen story and the outer edge of Bikini Bottom. Bottom. Sheldon J. Plankton walked out of that dump in the Friend or Foe flashback with the smaller half of the recipe in his hand and a wound that has shaped every decision he has made since. The piece of paper he ended up with read only the words and a pinch of chum, and that single phrase has become the curse of his entire adult life. He has tried to recreate the patty with his torn fragment as a starting point, and the result has always been chum, the inedible mixture of fish parts and waste that real-world fishermen use as bait. The Chum Bucket, the failed restaurant he built directly across the street from Mr. Krabs, has been a monument to that failure for the entire run of the show, and the man who runs it is one of the most quietly tragic characters in any animated series that has ever aired on a children's network. His full name is Sheldon J. Plankton, and the canon places his birth on November 30th, 1942, the same day as Mr. Krabs, in the same hospital. The two were placed in adjacent cribs as newborns, and, according to the flashbacks in Friend or Foe, the friendship began the moment they were able to recognize each other's faces. They went through their entire childhood as inseparable companions, both of them outcasts, both of them bullied by the same group of children. The bullying took different forms for each of them. Mr. Krabs was bullied for his poverty. Plankton was bullied for his intelligence. He was a small, scientifically gifted child in a town where being smart and small was treated as a kind of personal failing, and the cruelty of his peers, combined with the isolation of being the only kid in school who actually understood the experiments his teachers were running, shaped him into something specific. He grew up bitter, brilliant, and lonely, and the loneliness eventually built him a wife. The story of how Karen came into existence is one of the strangest pieces of canon in any animated show. According to the episode Friend or Foe, and expanded later in episodes like Goo Goo Gas and Plankton the Movie from Netflix, Karen began her existence as a calculator. Plankton, as a child, having no friends after his fight with Mr. Krabs, decided to build himself a companion. He took a simple blue calculator, plugged it into a potato and a petri dish, and programmed it with the basics of an artificial intelligence. The machine he built was self-aware enough to name herself, and she chose the name Karen. For years afterward, Plankton continued upgrading her. The calculator became a more complex computer. The computer became a security system, a role she fills in some of the earlier flashback episodes. The security system became a full, waterproof supercomputer with a wall-mounted monitor in the Chum Bucket laboratory and, eventually, a mobile, wheeled form that allows her to move around the restaurant. The choice to name her Karen was, in real life, a tribute. Stephen Hillenburg named the character after his own wife, Karen Hillenburg, whose maiden name was Umland. Stephen had married her in 1998, the year before SpongeBob aired. He has said in interviews that Karen Hillenburg is the funniest person he knows, and he wanted the cartoon Karen to carry some of his real wife's sense of humor. The voice of Karen was given to Jill Talley, a comedic actress who happens to be married, in real life, to Tom Kenny, the voice of SpongeBob himself. The two of them have been recording together for over 25 years, and according to interviews, the back and forth between Plankton and Karen, voiced by Mr. Lawrence and Jill Talley, has gradually started to overlap with their own real-life marriages. The voice directors have, on occasion, had to ask them to stop doing two voices at the same time. The acronym Plankton uses for Karen, according to the show's own writing, is WIFE, which stands for Wired Integrated Female Electroencephalograph. Whether that acronym is a sweet domestic joke or a slightly disturbing piece of writing about the nature of their relationship depends on the episode and the era. Karen is the brains of the Chum Bucket. She is the one who actually invents the schemes Plankton uses to try to steal the Krabby Patty formula. He, in turn, has a long history of taking credit for her ideas, which has been a recurring source of tension across the seasons. In their better episodes, like Single Cell Anniversary, Plankton genuinely loves her, and she genuinely loves him. He calls her honey and sweetie. She makes a heart shape on her screen when she is happy. They celebrate their anniversary. They have ups and downs. They argue. They reconcile. The show, when it is treating them well, treats them as one of the most stable and devoted married couples in the entire cast, more functional in many ways than any of the human-fish relationships in the show. In their worse episodes, the relationship is mined for darker comedy. In Plankton the Movie, the 2025 Netflix feature, the entire plot is driven by Karen reaching a breaking point after years of being underappreciated. She removes her own empathy chip and becomes Hydra Karen, a multi-headed war machine who plans to conquer Bikini Bottom and then the world. Plankton has to team up with SpongeBob to stop her, and the resolution involves him acknowledging, for the first time in his adult life, that he has spent decades taking the woman he loves for granted. The film treats this with surprising weight. The relationship that began with a lonely child plugging a calculator into a potato has, by 2025, become a 40-plus year marriage that has nearly ended over the question of whether one partner has actually been listening to the other. Outside the chum bucket, the world of Bikini Bottom keeps expanding, and one of the most important pieces of that expansion arrived in the very first episode of the show. Sandy Cheeks made her debut on May 1st, 1999, in the segment Tea at the Tree Dome, the third short of the original pilot. SpongeBob, having just been hired at the Krusty Krab in Help Wanted, encounters her wrestling a giant clam and decides to help. The clam tries to eat Sandy. Sandy fights it off. SpongeBob accidentally gets eaten in the process. Sandy rescues him, and the two of them become friends. She invites him back to her home for tea, and her home turns out to be a glass dome filled with air, with a tree growing inside it, sitting at the bottom of the ocean. SpongeBob, being a sea sponge, immediately starts to dehydrate the moment he steps inside. Sandy is the only main character in the show who is not actually an ocean creature. She is a squirrel, originally from Texas, with a deep southern accent and a personality built around scientific curiosity, athletic competition, and the kind of homesick patriotism that the show has occasionally played for genuine emotion. According to Stephen Hillenburg, Sandy was originally meant to come from Houston, although the show has never confirmed the city directly on screen. Hillenburg said that her diving suit reminded him of an astronaut, and Houston, being the home of the Johnson Space Center, felt like the right hometown for a character who arrived in Bikini Bottom dressed for what looks like a space mission. In the episode Texas, Sandy gets so homesick that SpongeBob and Patrick try to throw her a goodbye party, and the episode includes a song called I Wanna Go Home, where Sandy, briefly and without her usual bravado, becomes genuinely sad. She insists she is not crying, in true Texan fashion. She says her helmet has sprung a leak. The line is one of the most quietly tender moments in the entire run of the early seasons. The reason she came to Bikini Bottom is itself a piece of canon that was layered in over time. In her early appearances, she is described simply as a scientist, studying sea creatures and their lifestyles. In the season 4 episode Chimps Ahoy, the show reveals that her actual employers are a trio of upper-class, English-accented chimpanzees from the surface, named Dr. Marmalade, Lord Reginald, and Professor Percy. They run an organization called Tree Dome Enterprises, and they pay Sandy to invent things. Her assignment, the thing she is actually being funded to produce, is groundbreaking inventions, not marine research. Marine research is what she does on the side because she enjoys it. The chimps, in the episode, threaten to pull her funding because she has been spending too much time hanging out with SpongeBob and Patrick instead of inventing. SpongeBob accidentally rescues her job by demonstrating, by sheer dumb luck, an invention she had built called a nutcracker that can peel a banana. The chimps are so impressed that they extend her contract for 20 more years and increase her salary. The episode is played for comedy, but it also, very quietly, locks Sandy into Bikini Bottom for the foreseeable future. Her contract has been renewed. She is staying. The Tree Dome itself is one of the most carefully designed locations in the show. It is a large polyurethane glass dome filled with air, located at 126 Conch Street, 2 doors down from SpongeBob's Pineapple. Inside the dome is a real oak tree, which produces oxygen, and a small house built into the trunk. The dome includes a hamster wheel, a picnic table, a bird bath, and a bedroom where Sandy sleeps, in a wooden bed made from branches of her own tree. There is a phone made of acorns, sticks, and a leaf. Whenever any of her sea creature friends visit, they have to wear water helmets, which are bowls of water that fit over their heads and let them breathe normally inside her air-filled environment. The reverse rule applies when she leaves the dome. She wears a full diving suit with a glass helmet, and the air inside the helmet is what allows her to walk around the rest of the city without drowning. The visual design of her costume is, almost certainly on purpose, extremely close to the design of a real NASA spacesuit, which is one of the layered jokes of the character. She is a Texan, she is a squirrel, and she is dressed like a Houston astronaut, and all three of those things are doing comedic work at the same time. The supporting cast around the main characters is enormous, and most of them have small but specific pieces of canon attached to their names. Mrs. Puff, the boating school instructor, is a pufferfish whose physical condition makes her inflate dramatically whenever SpongeBob crashes a boatmobile into her, which happens in nearly every episode she appears in. Her backstory includes an unseen husband named Mr. Puff, who was, in canon, eventually turned into a lamp. The detail is delivered as a one-line gag and never explained further. Larry the Lobster is the muscle-bound lifeguard at Goofy Goober. Old Man Jenkins is the recurring elderly resident who shows up everywhere and seems to have died and come back to life multiple times across the series. Bubble Bass is the demanding customer who, in his most famous appearance, hides a pickle under his tongue to falsely accuse the Krusty Krab of poor service. Flats the Flounder is a one-episode bully who walks into the Krusty Krab and threatens to kick SpongeBob's butt for the entire length of an episode. Each of them is built with the same care that the main cast received, and the city, by the time you have watched all of them in rotation, feels less like a cartoon setting and more like a small town where the same faces keep showing up. That is the lore of SpongeBob SquarePants in its lightest and most canonical form. A man from Anaheim built a comic book about tide pools, took it to animation school, pitched it to Nickelodeon with a fish tank in his arms, and ended up creating an entire underwater city populated by a sea sponge, a starfish, an octopus, a Texan squirrel in an astronaut suit, a crab who runs a restaurant, a teenage whale daughter whose mother has never been drawn, a copepod with a calculator wife, a trio of English chimpanzees on the surface, and several hundred recurring background fish with names and personalities. The world he built was so detailed that it could carry over 25 years of programming without running out of corners to explore. But the show he built was always carrying something darker underneath it, and the darker layer was put there on purpose. The location of Bikini Bottom is not a random pun. The reason fire works underwater on the show, the reason creatures can talk, the reason the city is built on top of the wreckage of mufflers and old diving helmets. All of these design choices were rooted in a specific real-world history that Hillenburg knew about from his marine biology days, that a longtime writer eventually confirmed on the record in 2024, and that has been sitting underneath the cheerful surface of every episode since the very first one aired. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The lore of SpongeBob SquarePants ends here. From this point forward, the second half of the video walks through the dark secrets, the banned episodes, the controversies, and the real-world history that the show has been quietly carrying for over 25 years. The first of those secrets is the one that has been hiding in plain sight since 1999, encoded into the very name of the city, and it is finally, in 2024, no longer a fan theory. In the next section, we walk through the real history of Bikini Atoll, the nuclear tests, the displaced people, and the moment a longtime SpongeBob writer admitted on the record that the entire show takes place after the surface world has died. Section 6. Bikini Atoll and the Post-apocalyptic truth beneath the show. The name Bikini Bottom is a pun, and the pun is built around a real place. Bikini Atoll is a coral reef in the Marshall Islands, located in the Central Pacific Ocean, made up of 23 small islands arranged in a rough oval shape around a central lagoon. It is a real place. It still exists today. It is also one of the most contaminated locations on Earth. And the reason for that contamination is a chapter of human history that, until very recently, the SpongeBob writing room treated as a quiet inside joke that they were not willing to fully confirm. In 2024, that changed, and a fan theory that had been circulating in Reddit threads since at least 2015 was confirmed on the record by a longtime writer of the show. The confirmation was published in an Esquire interview with the main cast members, and the implications of what was said in that interview reach all the way back to the very first episode of the show. To understand what was confirmed, you have to understand what actually happened at Bikini Atoll. In the aftermath of World War II, the United Nations placed a vast region of the northern Pacific Ocean under the trusteeship of the United States. That region included the Marshall Islands. The United States government, looking for a remote location to test the next generation of nuclear weapons that had been developed at the end of the war, chose 2 islands inside the Marshall Chain. One was Eniwetok Atoll to the west. The other was Bikini Atoll. Between 1946 and 1958, The United States detonated a total of 67 nuclear weapons in the Marshall Islands, with 23 of those weapons detonated specifically at Bikini Atoll. The tests included the largest hydrogen bomb the United States ever exploded, a device called Castle Bravo, which was detonated on March 1, 1954. The Bravo blast was approximately 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The human cost of those tests is something that history books have only recently begun to fully document. In 1946, the United States government removed the indigenous population of Bikini, which numbered 167 people, and relocated them to a smaller atoll called Rongerik. The Bikinians experienced starvation almost immediately because Rongerik did not have the food crops they needed to survive. They were moved again and again. The Bikini people are now, in the present day, exiles. They have never returned to their original homeland. The land is still considered too contaminated for permanent human habitation. The radiation levels in the soil and the surrounding waters remain elevated more than 70 years after the last test was conducted. Every March 1st, the Marshall Islands hold a National Day of Remembrance. School children in the Republic of the Marshall Islands gather every year on the anniversary of the Bravo detonation to remember what happened to their ancestors and to the land their ancestors lost. This is the place that Stephen Hillenburg chose in 1997 to name his children's cartoon after. He could have made up any name. He could have invented an underwater geography of his own. He chose a real one, a famous one, and one with a very specific dark history that he, as a marine biologist, would have known about in detail. The choice was not accidental. According to longtime writer and voice actor Mr. Lawrence, who has been with the show since the very first season and who voices Plankton, the connection was always part of the design. In December 2024, Mr. Lawrence appeared in an Esquire interview alongside the main cast of the show. The voice actor Roger Bumpus, who plays Squidward, brought up the long-running fan theory that Bikini Bottom was related to the atomic testing at Bikini Atoll. Roger Bumpus said he had been telling fans for years that the theory was not true. Mr. Lawrence, sitting next to him, immediately corrected him. The exchange, recorded on video, is short and direct. Roger Bumpus said he always liked the theory that the whole thing was related to the atomic testing in Bikini Atoll. Mr. Lawrence said that it was true. Bumpus, surprised, said that he had been telling people it was not. Mr. Lawrence repeated that yes, it was absolutely true, and that the connection was part of the fun of designing the show. Then Mr. Lawrence said something that pushed the implications even further. He said that, in the very first season, the writers had asked themselves how far they were going to take the concept. He said that the original idea was that the whole world was dead except for Bikini Bottom. The line is direct. The voice actor Bill Fagerbach, who plays Patrick, asked whether the muffler-shaped houses were part of that concept. Mr. Lawrence said yes. The world upstairs, he said, was gone, and Bikini Bottom was what was left. The implications of what Mr. Lawrence said in that interview are enormous, even though he delivered them casually. According to the original concept of the show, Bikini Bottom is a post-apocalyptic city. The surface world has been destroyed by nuclear war. The fish, sea sponges, starfish, crabs, and octopi who live at the bottom of the ocean have been mutated by the radiation into anthropomorphic creatures who can talk, walk, work, and build houses out of the wreckage of the world above. The mufflers that make up so many of the homes are car parts that fell from the surface after civilization ended. The diving helmets used as mailboxes belong to humans who died long ago. The anchors used as lampposts came from ships that sank when the world ended. The reason fire works underwater is because the radiation broke the rules of physics. The reason a sea sponge can talk and a starfish can attend boating school is because the genetic structure of every species in the area has been permanently altered. This explains, retroactively, a number of design choices that previously seemed like random comedy. The shape of every explosion in the show is a mushroom cloud. The mushroom cloud is the visual signature of a nuclear blast. Every time something blows up in Bikini Bottom, from the ovens at the Krusty Krab to Plankton's failed inventions, the explosion takes the shape of a hydrogen bomb. Fans noticed this for years. The episode Dying for Pie has an explosion that closely resembles a real photograph of the Baker test, which was detonated underwater at Bikini Atoll on July 25, 1946, and which produced a distinctive, photographically documented mushroom cloud rising from the surface of the lagoon. The Baker test was the first time a nuclear weapon was ever detonated underwater. The shape it produced is the shape every SpongeBob explosion has been replicating, on purpose, for over 25 years. The fan theory, before it was confirmed, also pointed to a specific location inside the show, the city of Rock Bottom, which SpongeBob and Patrick accidentally visit in the Season 2 episode of the same name, is described by fans as being shaped like a deep crater. According to the post-nuclear theory, Rock Bottom is the literal blast crater left behind by an underwater detonation. The deep-sea creatures who live there are residents of the contaminated zone. The strange physics of the city, the way the bus schedule seems to actively work against SpongeBob, the way light behaves differently, the way the residents speak in a barely intelligible language. All of these design choices fit a reading of Rock Bottom as a place where the radiation was strongest, where the mutation was deepest, and where the world above is most thoroughly forgotten. Every other location in the show extends from this same logic. Bass Vegas, New Kelp City, the Dirty Bubble, the Flying Dutchman, who is an actual ghost of a sailor who died at sea long before the war ended the surface world. The episodes that involve fishing hooks, where the residents of Bikini Bottom panic at the appearance of a hook in the water, become harder to read as comedy once you know that the original concept assumed the surface world was dead. If the surface is dead, there should not be any humans left to fish. The show has been inconsistent about this, and the inconsistency is real. In the first feature film, David Hasselhoff appears as a literal human surface dweller who carries SpongeBob and Patrick across the ocean on his back. In other episodes, like pre-hibernation week, surface humans are clearly present and active. The post-apocalyptic original concept does not match what eventually became the show, and Mr. Lawrence himself acknowledged this in the Esquire interview. He said that the concept was where the writers started, but that the show, over the years, drifted away from that strict reading. The current version of the show treats the surface as alive, even though the original concept assumed it was dead. The result is that the canon of Bikini Bottom is now officially split. The original design, confirmed by a longtime writer in 2024, is post-apocalyptic. The current execution of the show is not. Both are now true at the same time, and the fanbase has accepted this contradiction without much resistance. The official Nickelodeon position, for years, has been to neither confirm nor deny the theory. A Nickelodeon spokesperson, in an email statement to Cracked magazine in 2021, said that the show was set in Bikini Bottom and declined to comment further. An anonymous staff member, speaking to the same publication, said that the theory was treated as well-accepted fan fiction inside the network's creative promotions department. People who worked on or adjacent to the show talked about the theory casually. Nobody officially said yes. In 2024, Mr. Lawrence finally said yes on camera. The thing that makes all of this strange, rather than simply dark, is that the show was never advertised as post-apocalyptic. It is a children's cartoon. It is bright, cheerful, and full of laughter. SpongeBob himself is one of the most relentlessly optimistic characters in animation history. The world in which he lives, by the original design of his creator, is the world that exists after everything else has ended. He is a cheerful sea sponge living in a pineapple, working as a fry cook, blowing bubbles, catching jellyfish, and learning to drive a boatmobile, on top of the ruins of a civilization that used the ocean above his head as a weapons testing range. The cheerfulness is the foreground. The apocalypse is the background. Both are true, and the show has always been holding both at the same time. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The post-apocalyptic origin of Bikini Bottom is the deepest piece of dark canon the show has ever produced, but it is not the most controversial. The show has, over its 25-year run, produced a small number of episodes that the network has actively pulled from circulation, that streaming services have removed, that DVD releases have quietly excluded, and that, in 2 specific cases, have not been seen on television in years. Some of those episodes were pulled because of timing. Some were pulled because of content. One of them was pulled because of a panty raid in a children's cartoon, and another was pulled because it predicted the COVID-19 pandemic with almost uncomfortable accuracy. In the next section, we walk through Midlife Crustacean, Quarantined Crab, and the episodes that Nickelodeon decided the world was no longer allowed to watch. Section 7. Midlife Crustacean, Quarantined Crab, and the episodes that were quietly erased. The library of SpongeBob SquarePants is enormous. Over 320 episodes have aired since 1999. The show has produced more individual segments of animation than almost any other Western cartoon in television history. Most of those segments are, when you sit down with them as an adult, exactly what you remember from childhood. The pace is fast, the jokes are clean, the animation is bright, the Patty Vault gag still works, the Squidward toenail moment still hurts to look at, the boatmobile still crashes. The vast majority of the show's library is exactly what it was always advertised as: a children's cartoon about a happy sea sponge and his friends, with a few quietly clever jokes layered in for the adults watching alongside their kids. 2 episodes, however, are not in that library anymore. They have been pulled. They are not in current rotation on Nickelodeon. They have been removed from streaming on Paramount+, although one of them was eventually restored after a long absence. They are not included on certain DVD releases. They are mentioned in the official episode lists, but actually watching them in the United States in 2026 requires either a physical home media collection from before the removals took effect, or a willingness to dig through corners of the internet that the network has not been able to fully scrub. The first of those episodes is Midlife Crustacean. The episode aired originally on January 24, 2003, as the second half of the 15th episode of Season 3. It was paired on the original broadcast with The Great Snail Race, an episode that has had its own quieter controversy because of how SpongeBob treats his pet snail Gary in the plot. Midlife Crustacean was written by Meriwether Williams, Jay Lender, and Sam Henderson, with Jay Lender and Sam Henderson serving as storyboard directors. The premise is straightforward. Mr. Krabs wakes up one morning, hears a song on his clock radio with lyrics that remind him of his advancing age, and slowly, over the course of one day, sinks into a midlife crisis. Pearl tells him he is old. A customer at the Krusty Krab compares his face to an old, dried-out Krabby Patty. He tries to use the word coral as slang for cool in an attempt to sound younger, and Pearl tells him that the word now sounds ruined. By the end of the morning, he is desperate enough to do something he has never done before, which is to ask SpongeBob and Patrick if he can join them for what they call their big night out. What follows for most of the episode is a series of strange, quiet, almost melancholy comedic vignettes. SpongeBob and Patrick's idea of a wild night turns out to be a series of childhood activities. They watch laundry tumble inside a washing machine at a laundromat. They play arcade games. They go to the dentist. They sit together at a diner. Mr. Krabs becomes increasingly frustrated. He is looking for the kind of night out that a younger man would have, and SpongeBob and Patrick are giving him the kind of night out that two children would invent. He starts to leave. He has decided that the entire evening was a mistake. Then comes the line that ended the episode's life on television. Patrick, sensing that Mr. Krabs is about to walk away, stops him at the door. Patrick tells him, in a casual tone, that he is going to miss the panty raid. Mr. Krabs, hearing the phrase, suddenly perks up. The word reactivates something in him. The three of them, together, then break into a stranger's house in the middle of the night, climb into the bedroom, open a chest of drawers, and pull out a pile of women's underwear. They throw the underwear in the air. They laugh. The owner of the house comes home. The owner is revealed to be Mr. Krabs' mother, Betsy. She is, understandably, horrified. Mr. Krabs is sent to his old childhood bedroom as punishment, where he is locked in for the night. He says, in a closing line, that he indeed feels young again. The episode ends. For 15 years, the episode aired in normal rotation. Children watched it, adults watched it. It was generally well received. TV Guide, in a 2019 ranking of the show's top 100 episodes, placed Midlife Crustacean at number 79. Then, in 2018, Nickelodeon quietly stopped airing it. There was no announcement at the time. The episode just disappeared from the rotation, and most viewers did not notice. In 2021, when Paramount Plus launched as a streaming service, the episode was missing from the SpongeBob library on the platform. Reporters from IGN noticed and asked the network for a statement. A Nickelodeon spokesperson, David Bitler, gave a brief response. He said that Midlife Crustacean had been out of rotation since 2018, following a standards review in which the network had determined that some story elements were not kid-appropriate. The spokesperson did not say which elements. He did not have to. Anyone who had seen the episode knew which scene was being referenced. The removal happened during a specific cultural moment, and the timing matters. The standards review at Nickelodeon took place in 2018, the same year the Me Too movement reached its full national prominence, and the same year the related Time's Up movement was launched. The cultural conversation about consent, about the casual sexualization of women in older media, and about the kinds of jokes that had been considered acceptable in the early 2000s and were no longer acceptable in the late 2010s, had become impossible for any major media company to ignore. Nickelodeon, looking at its catalog of children's programming, ran a review. The review flagged Midlife Crustacean. The episode came out of rotation, and it has stayed out of rotation, with one strange exception. In July 2023, a technical glitch on the Paramount Plus channel running through Amazon Prime Video accidentally restored the episode for a brief window. Subscribers who had a specific Paramount Plus Showtime bundle linked to their Prime Video account suddenly discovered that they could watch Midlife Crustacean for the first time in years. The discovery spread quickly through SpongeBob fan forums. People who had been waiting since 2018 to see the episode again rushed to watch it. A spokesperson from Paramount eventually confirmed to IGN that the restoration had been a mistake. The episode had been inadvertently posted for a brief period due to a technical error, and it was promptly removed again. The window had lasted for less than a week. The episode is, as of 2026, still unavailable on Paramount Plus in the United States. It does still exist on certain physical home media releases, including the DVD set From the Beginning Part 2 and the SpongeBob The First 100 Episodes DVD collection. The second pulled episode is Quarantined Crab. The story behind it is, in some ways, even stranger than Midlife Crustacean. because the episode was not pulled for what it contained. It was pulled for when it was scheduled to air. Quarantined Krab was written and animated for season 12 of the show, which began airing on November 11th, 2018. The episode was originally scheduled to premiere on April 4th, 2020, paired with another segment called My Two Krabses. The plot of Quarantined Krab is built around a fictional disease called clam flu. A health inspector arrives at the Krusty Krab. He scans the room with a device. He announces that someone inside the restaurant is carrying the disease, and that the building is now under emergency quarantine. SpongeBob, Patrick, Squidward, Mr. Krabs, Pearl, and Mrs. Puff are locked inside. Mr. Krabs proposes that anyone suspected of carrying the disease should be locked in the freezer. The episode then plays out as a series of escalating misunderstandings, with each character being thrown into the freezer one by one as the others become convinced that they are infected. The episode was written in 2018. It was animated in 2019. It was scheduled to air in early 2020. None of the people who created it had any way of knowing what was about to happen in the world. The COVID-19 pandemic was first detected in late 2019. By March 2020, it had spread across the world. The United States went into widespread lockdown in mid-March. Schools closed, restaurants closed, workplaces closed. People were told to stay inside their homes. People who showed any sign of illness were isolated from their families. The phrase quarantine, which had been a fairly obscure word in everyday American life, became one of the most common words in the language. By the time April 4th, 2020 arrived, the United States was in the middle of the deepest collective public health crisis it had experienced in over a century. And Nickelodeon was scheduled to air a SpongeBob episode about a fast food restaurant being placed under quarantine because of a fast-spreading flu, in which infected people are locked away from the healthy. The network pulled the episode. A Nickelodeon spokesperson said in a statement that the network had decided not to air it due to the sensitivities surrounding the global, real-world pandemic. The phrasing was careful. The episode itself, the spokesperson made clear, was not the problem. The problem was the timing. The plot was a coincidence. The writers had not predicted anything. They had simply written a comedic episode about a fictional flu, and the world had then, by accident, made the episode unwatchable for the foreseeable future. Quarantined Krab stayed off the air for over 2 years. It finally premiered on Nickelodeon in the United States on April 29, 2022, as the final episode of Season 12 to air. By that point, the immediate emotional weight of the early pandemic had faded enough that the network felt comfortable broadcasting the episode. It was added to Paramount Plus in 2023. It is now, in 2026, available to stream and watch in normal rotation. The episode is the only segment of SpongeBob SquarePants that has never been released on DVD, because the complete 12th season DVD set was released in January 2021, while the episode was still being held back from broadcast. By the time the episode was finally aired, the DVD release window had closed. The Quarantined Krab situation is a strange piece of television history. The episode was not banned. It was not pulled because of its content. It was pulled because reality, by accident, made the content unbearable to watch. There is no other major American animated series that has had an episode quarantined, in the literal sense, by an actual pandemic. The episode now exists in the catalog as a small, strange artifact of a moment when the gap between fiction and reality collapsed almost completely. There is a third episode that often gets mentioned in the same conversation, and it is worth noting briefly. The episode is The Splinter, a Season 6 entry that aired on August 2nd, 2008. The plot involves SpongeBob getting a splinter under his fingernail. The injury becomes infected. The infection grows. By the end of the episode, the splinter has become so large and the infection so visually grotesque, with detailed close-up animation of pus and swelling, that many viewers consider the episode genuinely difficult to watch. The splinter was never officially pulled. It is still on streaming. It still airs in rotation, but it sits inside fan conversations as the episode that should have been pulled and never was. And the contrast between the splinter being permitted and midlife crustacean being banned is something the SpongeBob fanbase has been arguing about for years. The pattern that connects midlife crustacean and quarantined crab is that both episodes were pulled because of cultural context, not because of anything inherent to the episodes themselves. Midlife crustacean was acceptable in 2003 and not acceptable in 2018. Quarantined crab was acceptable in 2018 and not acceptable in April 2020. The episodes did not change. The world around them changed. Nickelodeon, looking at its own library through new eyes, decided that some things that had been allowed before would no longer be allowed. That decision, applied across a show with over 300 episodes, will eventually catch a small number of segments that the original writers and animators never imagined would become unwatchable. 2 of them have already been caught. There may, over the next 25 years, be more. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The 2 pulled episodes are the most public examples of SpongeBob being edited after the fact, but there is an even older example. And the older example was made not because of a panty raid or a pandemic, but because of a national tragedy that struck the United States only weeks before the episode was scheduled to air. The original cut of one of the most beloved Squidward episodes in the entire show's run includes a scene that has not been seen on American television in over 20 years. In the next section, we walk through the burning Squidward sequence in Just One Bite, the September 11th attacks, the standards and practices issue, the deleted moments in procrastination, and the cuts that Nickelodeon made quietly enough that an entire generation of viewers grew up never knowing they had been made. Section 8. Just One Bite, the burning Squidward scene, and the edits made after a national tragedy. The episode Just One Bite is one of the most beloved entries in the entire SpongeBob SquarePants library. It aired on October 5th, 2001, as the second half of the 3rd episode of Season 3. The plot on the surface is one of the cleanest comedic premises the show has ever produced. SpongeBob, as a fry cook, has been making Krabby Patties for years, and Squidward, as the cashier sitting 12 feet away from him, has somehow never tried one. The opening of the episode reveals that Squidward has gone his entire adult life without eating the food his coworker prepares, and SpongeBob, scandalized, decides that today is the day. He insists. Squidward refuses. SpongeBob will not let go. Squidward, finally, agrees to take just one bite. He chews. His face goes blank. He realizes that the patty is the most delicious thing he has ever tasted. He tries to play it off. He pretends to hate it. He goes home pretending that nothing has happened. Then, in the middle of the night, he sneaks back to the Krusty Krab to steal more. The episode is a classic. It contains some of the most quoted lines in the entire run of the show. SpongeBob's high-pitched insistence that Squidward simply try one bite has become a meme that has lived on the internet for over 20 years. The visual of Squidward slowly, secretly making his way back to the patty vault in the middle of the night, with a flashlight in one tentacle and a desperate look in his eyes, is one of the most recognizable images in the show. The episode appears on dozens of best-of lists. It is, by any reasonable measure, one of the strongest comedic half-segments the show has ever produced. It is also, in its current rotation in the United States, missing a scene. The original cut of Just One Bite, as it aired on October 5th, 2001, included a longer sequence in which Squidward, sneaking into the Krusty Krab in the middle of the night to steal patties from the patty vault, accidentally triggers a security system that Mr. Krabs has installed specifically to keep intruders out. The security system in the original cut is not a typical alarm. It is a bucket of gasoline perched above the door, designed to spill on any thief who enters. Squidward, walking into the patty vault, knocks the bucket over. The gasoline spills onto him. He is now drenched in gasoline. Then, in the same booby trap, a lit match falls. The match ignites the gasoline. Squidward catches fire. There is an explosion. The screen goes briefly white. The sound is loud. In some original versions, the scene then shows a second explosion, immediately following the first. The episode aired with that scene intact on October 5th, 2001. The September 11th attacks had occurred only 24 days earlier, on September 11th, 2001. The country was still in the middle of one of the most traumatic news cycles in modern American history. Television networks across the United States were quietly reviewing their schedules and pulling content that referenced terrorism, large-scale violence, explosions, or the visual signature of catastrophic destruction. The list of films and television episodes that were edited or pulled in the months following the attacks is long. Almost every major studio quietly removed something from the Twin Towers from a film or a poster. Some episodes of dramatic series were postponed. Some were rewritten. The country, for several months, was not in a place to absorb fictional explosions delivered as comedy. Just One Bite, by the calendar, fell into that window. Reports of the gasoline scene being deleted from later airings emerged as early as January 2002, only 3 months after the episode originally aired. By the time the episode entered regular rotation in 2002 and 2003, the scene was gone. American audiences who watched the episode after the first airing simply never saw the burning Squidward. The cut was not announced. There was no press release. The episode just quietly stopped including the scene, and an entire generation of viewers grew up watching a slightly shorter version of Just One Bite, without knowing that anything was missing. The reason for the cut was, for many years, a matter of speculation. Multiple theories circulated. The most common theory was that the cut was made out of respect for the victims of the September 11th attacks. The visual of an explosion delivered for laughs only weeks after a real catastrophe in which thousands of people had died in fires and explosions felt inappropriate to the people running the network. A second theory was that the cut was made out of concern that children might attempt to imitate the scene. Gasoline, a match, and a fire are all real things that exist in real homes, and the worry was that a child watching SpongeBob might decide to test the booby trap concept in their own kitchen. A third theory was that the cut was simply a standards and practices decision that was unrelated to either of the first two reasons. The truth, as confirmed years later by the people who made the episode, turned out to be a combination of the first and the third theory. Jay Lender, one of the writers of the episode, gave an interview to SpongeBuddy Mania in January 2007, in which he discussed the cut directly. He confirmed that the original version of the scene had passed every level of approval at Nickelodeon during the production process. The scene had been written, storyboarded, animated, edited, and approved before the episode was sent to air. Then, after the September 11th attacks, the climate changed. Lender said that the September 11th attacks were a major factor in the subsequent decision to remove the scene. He also said that there was a related standards and practices issue that had not been the deciding factor before September 11th, but had become more difficult to ignore afterward. The combination of the timing and the existing concerns produced the cut. In June 2018, longtime SpongeBob writer and current showrunner Vincent Waller confirmed the same thing in a statement on Twitter. He said that the removal of the scene was due to a standards and practices issue, and Nickelodeon being against the idea of a gag involving a match and gasoline. The decision was, in the end, both about the post-September 11th cultural moment and about the network's general policy against showing children specific imitable behaviors involving fire and accelerants. The strange thing about the cut, and the reason fans have been petitioning for its restoration for over a decade, is that the show has continued to air far more graphic content in subsequent episodes. The Splinter from Season 6 contains close-up imagery of a swelling, infected wound that many adult viewers find genuinely difficult to watch. The episode House Fancy from Season 6 contains a moment where Squidward's toenail is ripped off, and the camera lingers on the injury with deliberate, painful detail. The Squidward toenail scene has aired without modification, and the moment is so well known that it has become a meme in its own right. Fans started a petition on change.org in 2015 asking Nickelodeon to restore the deleted scene from Just One Bite, pointing out that the network had aired far more graphic material since. The petition got significant signatures. The scene was not restored. As of 2026, the gasoline sequence is still missing from American airings of Just One Bite, although it remains intact in some Canadian airings on YTV and Nickelodeon Canada, and on certain home media releases that predate the cut. Just One Bite is not the only episode that was edited after the fact. The Season 2 episode Procrastination, which aired on October 12, 2001, only 1 week after Just One Bite, contained its own set of deleted scenes that have been cut from American broadcasts for years. Procrastination is a quiet, character-driven episode about SpongeBob trying to write an essay for boating school. He has 800 words to write on the subject of what not to do at a stoplight. He cannot focus. The episode follows him through every form of distraction a writer can invent, and most of it is still intact in current airings. But 3 specific scenes were cut from the United States broadcasts, somewhere between May 2005 and October 2006, with the cuts only restored on Nicktoons airings in October 2019. The first cut scene shows SpongeBob looking out of his window and seeing his friends having fun outside. Patrick is rubbing sun lotion on Sandy's shoulders. Sandy is facing away from the window. Patrick says, "Come on, SpongeBob." The visual, depending on the angle and the way the animation is read, can look like Patrick is unhooking the strap of Sandy's bikini top. There is no actual implication of anything sexual in the writing. Patrick is just rubbing in lotion. But the visual was reinterpreted, somewhere between the original airing and the 2005 cut, as too suggestive for a children's network. The scene was removed. The second cut scene shows a live-action archival clip of a drag race. SpongeBob, fantasizing about getting his driver's license, imagines what driving will be like. The show inserts a real video of a dragster crashing into a wall, tumbling, and then somehow getting back up. The image is brief. The stock footage was removed from later American airings, with some sources speculating that the network was worried children might try to imitate it. The third cutscene shows SpongeBob doing calisthenics. He flexes. His nose, in the animation, makes a small movement that has been described, in some explanations, as resembling a phallic motion. The scene was apparently removed because, in some viewing, his nose looked obscene. The fact that this was the official reason is something that fans have been debating for decades, because the scene itself is so brief and the visual so subtle that most viewers never noticed anything inappropriate at all. The pattern that connects Just One Bite and Procrastination is that the cuts were made quietly. There were no announcements. There were no warnings. The episodes simply began airing in shorter versions, and the original full versions were quietly retired. American viewers who watched the show through the early 2000s and 2010s were watching, in many cases, edited episodes without knowing that they were edited. The full version still existed on certain DVD releases, and dedicated fans who collected the physical media noticed the discrepancies and posted about them online. But for the casual viewer, the cuts were invisible. The show simply was what was on television, and the parts that had been removed had no reason to be missed because nobody knew they were missing. The deeper truth, sitting underneath both Just One Bite and procrastination, is that the show has been quietly editing itself since the beginning. The original concept of Bikini Bottom as a post-apocalyptic city was edited out of the canon before the writers had even finished the first season. The burning Squidward scene was edited out 3 months after it first aired. The lotion scene in Procrastination was edited out 4 years after it first aired. The 2 pulled episodes from the previous section were edited out 15 years and 2 years after they first aired, respectively. The version of the show that exists in 2026 is not the version that aired in 1999. Pieces of it have been quietly removed, scene by scene, episode by episode, decade by decade. Most viewers will never know the difference. The pieces that are still there are still wonderful. The pieces that are gone, and only the people who saw the originals or who collect the older home media remember that they were ever part of the show at all. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The cuts to Just One Bite and Procrastination were made because the network decided certain content was too dark to keep on the air. But there are 2 episodes from later seasons of the show that were never cut, never pulled, and never edited, and that many fans believe are darker than anything the network has ever removed. Both of them deal directly with one of the heaviest subjects a children's cartoon can possibly engage with. One of them ends with Plankton lying down on a road and waiting for a bus to hit him. The other ends with Squidward putting a noose around his neck before the show pulls the camera back and reveals that the rope was for something else. In the next section, we walk through One Course Meal, Are You Happy Now?, and the suicide episodes that somehow made it past standards and practices. Section 9, One Course Meal, Are You Happy Now?, and the suicide episodes that got through. 2 episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants are routinely named in fan discussions and critical writing as the darkest the show has ever produced. Neither of them was ever pulled from the air. Neither of them has ever been removed from streaming. Both of them are still available on Paramount Plus today, and both of them still air occasionally in the show's regular rotation. They are both, by the standards the network used to remove Midlife Crustacean and to edit Just One Bite, arguably more disturbing than the episodes that were taken off the air. They were not removed. They are still there. The reason they are still there has a lot to do with the specific way each episode handles its subject, and the conversations that have been happening around them since the moment they first aired. The first of the 2 is One Course Meal. The episode aired on November 13th, 2010, as the first half of the 11th episode of Season 7. It was written by Aaron Springer, Chris Mitchell, and Mr. Lawrence, the longtime writer of the show and the voice of Plankton. The fact that Mr. Lawrence himself wrote the episode is a piece of the controversy that fans have returned to many times over the years, because the character he voices is the one being tormented by the plot. The story begins with one of the most action-packed openings of any episode in Season 7. Plankton has, for once, succeeded. He has built a complex device that has captured Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob inside the Krusty Krab. He has them suspended above the floor in a kind of mechanical claw. He is about to extract the location of the secret formula. Then Pearl, Krabs' teenage whale daughter, walks into the kitchen looking for something to eat. Pearl is enormous. She is also, in the SpongeBob universe, a sperm whale, and real sperm whales feed on plankton in the ocean. The moment Plankton sees her, he panics, he runs, he flees the Krusty Krab, leaving Mr. Krabs and SpongeBob still trapped in his own machine. He returns to the chum bucket and tells Karen, his computer wife, about the experience. He confesses that he is afraid of whales. He explains that his ancestors were eaten by whales generations ago, and that the fear has been passed down through his family. Karen, in this episode, is unsympathetic. She tells him there are no whales in the chum bucket and dismisses the fear as ridiculous. Mr. Krabs, having freed himself from the trap by some unspecified means, learns about Plankton's fear. The information gives him an idea. He puts on a costume. The costume is a near-perfect replica of Pearl, his own daughter. He wears her face. He uses her voice, which he can apparently imitate exactly. He goes to the chum bucket disguised as her. He stands outside Plankton's lab and announces that he wants to eat Plankton. Plankton, seeing what he believes to be Pearl, runs for his life. Mr. Krabs laughs. He returns home, takes off the costume, and prepares to do it all again the next day. The episode then enters a montage that the show treats as comedy. The on-screen counter, in some readings of the episode, suggests that the torment continues for 16 days. Every time Plankton steps outside the chum bucket, Mr. Krabs is there in the Pearl costume, threatening to eat him. Plankton tries to hide. He boards up the windows. He installs more security. The torment continues. He stops sleeping. He has a nightmare in which a demonic, oversized version of Pearl swallows him whole. And then he discovers, inside her stomach, the bodies of his ancestors and family members, all of whom had been eaten by whales before him. The nightmare is animated with surprising visual horror for a children's cartoon. He wakes up screaming. By the next scene, Plankton has reached a place that the show treats with the calm of a closing scene. He walks out into the middle of a road. He lies down on the asphalt. He waits. SpongeBob, walking past, asks him what he is doing. Plankton tells him in a quiet voice that he is waiting for the 4 o'clock bus. He says he cannot take it anymore. The implication is direct. He is lying down on the road in order to be hit by a bus and killed. This is, in canon, a suicide attempt by a main character in a children's cartoon played for the resolution of a comedic plot. SpongeBob, to his credit, is the one character in the episode who treats the moment as serious. He realizes what is happening. He confronts Mr. Krabs in the office at the Krusty Krab and tells him that what he has been doing is wrong. He uses the word forlorn to describe Plankton's emotional state. He asks Mr. Krabs to stop. Mr. Krabs refuses. Mr. Krabs says, in the line that has been quoted in countless angry fan reviews, that Plankton is a mess, and laughs. He is amused that his nemesis has been driven to lie down on a road waiting for a bus. He sees no reason to feel guilty about it. SpongeBob, frustrated, goes back to Plankton. He tells him the truth, which is that Pearl was never the one tormenting him. It was Mr. Krabs in a costume the entire time. Plankton, hearing this, gets up off the road. He becomes furious. He decides to take revenge. Then SpongeBob makes a comment, in passing, about Mr. Krabs' secret fear. Mr. Krabs, it turns out, is afraid of mimes. Plankton, with this new information, hires a mime to follow Mr. Krabs everywhere he goes. The mime appears. Mr. Krabs panics. SpongeBob, however, in the final twist, scares Plankton away from the Krusty Krab, using a hologram of a crowd of realistic-looking whales, freeing Mr. Krabs from the mime. The episode ends with the mime continuing to follow Mr. Krabs around as a kind of mild comedic punishment. The reaction to one-course meal was immediate and furious. Fan forums lit up. The episode was reviewed across the SpongeBob fan community as one of the worst the show had ever produced. Not because the writing was bad or the animation was poor, but because the moral arc of the story was, by the time it finished, deeply troubling. Mr. Krabs is the protagonist of the episode. He is the one who wins. He has driven another character to attempt suicide, has laughed about it on screen, and has faced no real consequences. Plankton, the victim of 16 days of psychological torture, ends the episode having been scared away from the Krusty Krab again, which is the same status quo the show always returns to. Karen, his own wife, has shown him no empathy for any of the events of the episode. SpongeBob, who briefly stood up for him, ultimately betrays him in the final scene. The only character left standing, with the power and the laughter intact, is the man who put on his daughter's face and used it to torment another character into lying down on a road. A petition was started on change.org asking Nickelodeon to ban the episode. The petition argued that the suicide attempt was treated like a joke, that the moral lesson of the episode was that bullying someone to the point of suicide was acceptable as long as you won, and that the episode could be genuinely harmful to children watching it who were dealing with their own mental health struggles. The petition gathered thousands of signatures. The episode was not banned. The petition was acknowledged by no one at Nickelodeon. The episode remained in rotation. As of 2026, it is still available to stream on Paramount+, and it still occasionally airs on Nickelodeon, 15 years after it first triggered the largest fan backlash in the show's history. The strange piece of writing about one-course meal that fans have returned to repeatedly is that Mr. Lawrence himself wrote it. Mr. Lawrence is the man who voices Plankton. He has been voicing Plankton since the very first episode of the show. He has been writing for the show since the early seasons. He developed the character of Plankton from a one-episode role into one of the most fully realized antagonists in the entire SpongeBob universe. And then, in 2010, he wrote an episode in which his own character was tormented to the brink of suicide. And Mr. Lawrence has, in interviews since, given various explanations for why he made the writing choices he did. None of those explanations have fully satisfied the fans, who consider the episode a betrayal of the character. The second of the two episodes is Are You Happy Now? The episode aired on March 31st, 2012, as the first half of the 17th episode of Season 8. It was written by Doug Lawrence, Mr. Lawrence's full credited name, alongside Casey Alexander and Zeus Servas. The episode, like One Course Meal, was written by the same voice actor who plays the character being put through the experience. Although in this case, the character is not Plankton, it is Squidward. The premise is small and quiet. SpongeBob, sitting next to Squidward at the Krusty Krab, asks him what his happiest memory is. Squidward, after thinking about the question for a moment, realizes that he does not have one. He cannot remember a single moment in his entire life that he would describe as happy. The realization is delivered with unusual weight. The show pauses. Squidward looks at the camera. He admits, without any of his usual sarcasm, that he has nothing. SpongeBob, characteristically, decides to fix the problem. He insists that he will help Squidward create a happiest memory. The first half of the episode is a montage of failed attempts. They go to a music hall. Squidward gets the bow of a violin lodged in his eye. They climb a mountain together. SpongeBob plants a flag on top and accidentally drives the flag through Squidward's foot. They visit a series of locations, and at every one of them, something painful or humiliating happens to Squidward. Each failed attempt drives him deeper into the depression that started the episode. Then the tone shifts. Squidward goes home. The animation slows down. The colors desaturate. He grows a stubble across his chin. He stops moving. He sits in his living room for what the episode implies is days at a time. His pet clam dies of neglect. He stares at the wall. The show, for several minutes, plays the depression as a serious medical condition rather than a comedic setup. There is no joke being constructed underneath the silence. There is just a character who has stopped being able to function. Then comes the first of the two scenes that earned the episode its reputation. Squidward gets up. He walks slowly to the kitchen. He opens the door of the oven. He kneels down in front of it. He places his head inside. The framing is direct. The reference is direct. Putting one's head in an oven is one of the most recognizable methods of suicide in modern Western culture, made famous by the death of the poet Sylvia Plath in 1963. The show holds the shot. The audience is given several seconds to absorb what they are watching. Then Squidward pulls a tray of brownies out of the oven. He had been baking. The bait and switch is over. He sits down with the brownies and eats them, still depressed but apparently not actively trying to die. The second scene comes a few minutes later. Squidward, still in his living room, picks up a length of rope. He ties one end into a loop. He throws the other end over a ceiling beam. He pulls the rope tight. He puts the loop around something the audience cannot quite see. The framing, again, is direct. The visual reference is direct. He appears to be tying a noose. He appears to be preparing to hang himself. The show holds the shot. Then the camera pulls back, and the audience sees that he is not hanging a noose. He is hoisting up a bird cage. The bait and switch is over. The reaction to "Are You Happy Now?" was, like the reaction to one-course meal, immediate. The bait and switch suicide gags were widely criticized. The argument from fans was simple. The show, by setting up two separate visual moments designed to make the audience believe that Squidward was about to kill himself, was using the imagery of suicide as a comedic punchline. The fact that Squidward was not actually trying to die, in the narrative, did not change the fact that the scenes had been constructed specifically to make the audience think he was. The misdirection was the joke. The setup required the audience to take the suicide reading seriously, even if only for a few seconds, in order for the punchline to land. The episode's resolution did not help. SpongeBob, in a final attempt to give Squidward a happy memory, throws him a party at the Krusty Krab. None of the guests show up. SpongeBob, knowing in advance that the guests had canceled, has filled the restaurant with hundreds of papier-mâché replicas of himself instead. Squidward, walking into the restaurant, sees an entire room full of identical SpongeBob faces staring at him. Something inside him breaks. He grabs a bat. He starts smashing the papier-mâché SpongeBobs, one after another, in a sustained scene of violent destruction. The destruction continues until every replica is in pieces. Squidward, panting, with bits of paper in his hair, looks up. SpongeBob asks him, quietly, if this counts as his happiest memory. Squidward smiles. He says yes. The episode ends with him sitting in the wreckage, finally happy, having found his happy memory in the act of destroying hundreds of effigies of his coworker. The implications, when you think about them, are heavy. Squidward's happiness is built on the symbolic murder of SpongeBob. The episode treats this resolution as a positive ending. The status quo is preserved. Squidward goes back to work the next day. SpongeBob is still alive. The replicas are gone. The episode does not address what it has actually shown. The audience is left to either accept the ending as a comedic resolution or to sit with the implication that the only thing that has ever made Squidward happy is destroying images of the person who has been making his life miserable for the entire run of the series. The two episodes, taken together, form a strange pair. Both were written by people who had been with the show for years. Both involved main characters being driven to the edge of suicide. Both treated the moments with bait-and-switch comedic resolutions that allowed the show to walk back from the implications. Both were criticized at the time of release, and both have been criticized continuously in the years since. Neither one has been pulled from the air. Midlife Crustacean was pulled in 2018 because of a panty raid scene in which no one was killed and no one was seriously harmed. Quarantined Crab was pulled in 2020 because of a coincidental similarity to a real-world pandemic. One Course Meal and Are You Happy Now, both of which depict main characters preparing to take their own lives, have remained in the catalog. The decisions about what to pull and what to keep have, by any honest measure, not been consistent. The reason most often given by fans and critics is that the suicide moments in both episodes are technically resolved before any actual death occurs. Squidward is not actually hanging himself. He is hoisting a birdcage. Plankton is not actually killed by the bus. SpongeBob talks him off the road. The bait-and-switch structure gives the network the ability to argue, if pressed, that no character actually attempted suicide. The implication is in the staging, not in the outcome. That technicality has, for over a decade, been enough to keep both episodes in rotation. Whether it should be enough is a conversation that the SpongeBob community has been having continuously since the moments first aired, and that conversation has not yet reached a resolution that anyone seems satisfied with. What both episodes share, beyond their subject matter, is the strange fact that they exist inside a show that has spent 25 years being held up as one of the gentlest, most relentlessly cheerful pieces of children's entertainment ever made. The image of SpongeBob in the public imagination is the image of pure optimism. The image is not wrong. The vast majority of the show is exactly what people remember. But the vast majority is not all of it. Tucked inside the same library that produced the Patty Vault and the Campfire Song are two episodes in which a main character lies down on a road waiting to die, and another character ties what looks like a noose around his neck. The library contains both. The show contains both. The cheerful surface and the dark interior have, somehow, been coexisting since the very first season, and the network has, so far, decided not to look too closely at the contradiction. Before we move on, if you're enjoying this analysis, please consider subscribing. It helps the channel tremendously. The two suicide episodes are the darkest moments the show itself has officially produced, but the darkest version of SpongeBob has never been on Nickelodeon. It exists in a corner of the internet that has been growing, slowly and persistently, since 2010, where a fictional intern at Nickelodeon Studios claims to have witnessed the unedited rough cut of a Season 4 premiere that ended with Squidward putting a shotgun in his mouth. The story is fake. The story has also become so culturally embedded that the show itself has, on more than one occasion, started winking back at it. In the next section, we walk through the Squidward suicide creepypasta, the red mist tape, the disturbing fan theories about the Krabby Patty containing whale meat, the rumor about Pearl's missing mother, and the strange, persistent shadow culture the SpongeBob fanbase has been building underneath the official show for over 15 years. Section 10. The red mist tape, the whale carcass theory, and the shadows the fanbase built. The story begins on April 6th, 2010, on a forum called 7chan, in a subforum called Paranormal. An anonymous user posted a long piece of writing claiming to be a confession. The user said he had been, in 2005, an intern at Nickelodeon Studios, working with the editors and animators on the SpongeBob SquarePants production team, completing his degree in animation. He said he had been in the editing room one afternoon with two other interns and several lead animators and sound editors gathered around a screen to watch what was supposed to be the rough cut of an episode called Fear of a Krabby Patty, which would be the Season 4 premiere. He said the cassette tape they put into the player did not display the title Fear of a Krabby Patty when it began to play. The title that came up instead, on a black title card, was Squidward's Suicide. The story, in the original post, is written with the calm, methodical tone of a witness account. The intern says the team initially assumed the title was a morbid in-joke from the animators. He says they had seen this kind of thing before, with rough cuts sometimes carrying placeholder titles meant as throwaway gags. He says they decided to keep watching. The episode that played, according to the story, was not a rough cut of Fear of a Krabby Patty. It was something else entirely. The episode, as described in the Post, opens with Squidward practicing his clarinet. He hits a few sour notes. SpongeBob and Patrick laugh outside. Squidward yells at them to be quiet because he has a concert that night. The story is, up to this point, a normal SpongeBob episode. Then Squidward's performance at the concert begins. He plays badly. The audience boos him. The camera pans across the audience, and the eyes of the fish in the crowd, including SpongeBob and Patrick, are not the cartoon eyes of the show. They are described, in the Post, as hyper-realistic eyes with red pupils, photographed and edited into the animation in a way that makes them feel like actual human eyes pasted onto cartoon faces. Squidward walks home with his head in his tentacles. He sits in his bedroom. He cries. The crying does not sound like Squidward. The Post describes it as sounding like a real person, sobbing, recorded outside of any cartoon context. The story continues. Squidward, sitting in his bed, lifts his face from his hands. His eyes are now the same hyper-realistic eyes from the audience. Blood drips from them. Photographs flash on the screen between cuts of dead children. The Post describes the photographs in detail. They are gruesome. They are not animated. They are presented as if they were real. The crying gets louder. A voice in the background, deep and inhuman, says the words, "Do it." Squidward reaches under his bed. He pulls out a shotgun. He puts the barrel of the shotgun in his mouth. He pulls the trigger. The screen goes black. According to the original Post, 3 of the animators in the editing room were sent to the hospital after watching the episode. 1 editor retired immediately. One of the other interns, a young woman, killed herself shortly afterward. The narrator of the story, the one writing the Post, was the only intern present that day who survived without hospitalization. The tape was sent to the police. The police, according to the story, investigated and determined that the tape had been edited and submitted by a man named Andrew Skinner, a Scottish animator who had been working remotely on the show. Skinner was arrested. He was charged with multiple counts of murder, including the murders of the 2 children whose photographs appeared in the episode. The story ends with the narrator saying that he has spent the years since trying to forget what he saw, and that he is finally writing the story down because he cannot keep it inside any longer. None of this is true. There was no intern. There was no animator named Andrew Skinner. There were no dead children. The tape does not exist. The story is fiction. It is one of the most successful and widely circulated pieces of writing in the entire genre of internet horror writing called Creepypasta, a portmanteau of copy and paste that refers to short horror stories designed to be repeated, reposted, and retold across forums and chat threads. Squidward's suicide, also commonly called Red Mist after a related and slightly later piece of writing that built on the original story, became one of the foundational pieces of the Lost Episode subgenre of Creepypasta. The Lost Episode subgenre involves stories about cartoon series, usually beloved children's cartoons, that have allegedly produced a single, horrifying, unaired episode, usually preserved on a cursed tape, usually involving a beloved character dying violently. There are Lost Episode creepypastas about Mickey Mouse, Rugrats, Dexter's Laboratory, and dozens of other shows. Squidward's suicide is, by most measures, the most famous of all of them. The story spread quickly. By 2011, it had been reposted across hundreds of horror forums and websites. The image that came to be associated with the story, which is sometimes called Red Mist Squidward, shows a still of Squidward's face from the Season 3 episode Just One Bite, modified with red, glowing eyes and a desaturated background. the image became one of the most recognizable creepypasta images on the internet. It appeared in YouTube horror compilation videos. It was traded as a kind of underground meme. People who had never read the original story still recognized the image, and the image alone became enough to evoke the entire fictional horror. The strangest part of the story is what happened next. In December 2019, Nickelodeon aired an episode called SpongeBob in Random Land, the 56th episode of season 12. The episode involves SpongeBob and Squidward traveling to a strange dimension where each door leads to a warped, alternate universe version of themselves. They open multiple doors. Each one shows a different, distorted variation of a familiar character. One of the doors, in the original cut of the episode, opens to reveal a version of Squidward sitting in a dimly lit bedroom with red eyes, staring directly at the camera in a pose that exactly replicates the famous red mist Squidward image. The reference was deliberate. The episode was written by Kaz, and the storyboard was directed by Adam Paloyan. Paloyan himself confirmed in interviews afterward that the scene was a direct reference to the creepypasta. He had originally wanted to push the reference even further, with the face zooming closer and closer until Squidward slammed the door shut. The red mist Squidward shot was approved by Vincent Waller, the showrunner. The show was, in this episode, openly acknowledging the existence of the fictional horror story that had been circulating in its fan base for almost a decade. The reference did not last. Beginning in November 2019, after the original airing, the scene was censored. UK and Ireland airings replaced the red mist Squidward shot with a brief animation of a baby version of Squidward. Later United States airings did the same. The original version remained intact on certain international airings and on some streaming versions, but the broadcast version was edited. Nickelodeon's Standards and Practices Department, which had not flagged the scene before it aired, flagged it afterward. The scene was deemed too disturbing, too direct in its reference to a piece of writing that involved a fictional suicide and fictional photographs of dead children, and too likely to encourage curious children to look up the original story. The red mist Squidward image, after 20 seconds of canonical existence on a Nickelodeon broadcast, was removed. Adam Paloyan, in response to the censorship, said that he found it kind of fun. Vincent Waller, in subsequent interviews, has been clear that the original creepypasta is not canon to the show. He has called it ridiculous fan fiction. He has said that the only canon connection is the show poking fun at the existence of the story. The red mist Squidward who appears in Random Land, even before the censorship, was not the same Squidward from the creepypasta. He was, in the show's universe, simply an alternate dimension variant who happened to look like the famous fan-made image. But the wink was there. The show, after almost 10 years of pretending the creepypasta did not exist, finally acknowledged that it did. And then, almost immediately, the network walked the acknowledgement back. The Red Mist story is one of the two largest pieces of dark fan culture that the SpongeBob fanbase has built. The other one is older and quieter, and involves the Krabby Patty. The theory begins with the Krusty Krab training video, which we discussed earlier in this video. The narrator of that episode says, in passing, that Mr. Krabs returned from the war and stayed secluded in a deep depression that seemed endless. The line has weight. The fans noticed. Then, in the Season 1 episode Wet Painters, Mr. Krabs has a small framed photograph in his house. The photograph shows a giant whale near a sailboat. The composition of the photograph mirrors a famous illustration from the novel Moby Dick, in which a whaler hunts an enormous white whale across the open ocean. The photograph hangs on Mr. Krabs' wall as a piece of household decoration. Fans noticed. The theory builds outward from there. Pearl, in canon, is a sperm whale. According to the official trivia book written by former episode writer David Fain in 2000, Pearl's mother, the never-seen Mrs. Krabs, is also a whale, and Mr. Krabs has stated that Pearl takes after her mother. Mrs. Krabs has never been drawn. She has never been seen. She has never been referenced by name. Stephen Hillenburg, before his death, refused to allow the writers to ever explain what happened to her. A plot outline for an episode focused on Pearl's origin was written during season 5 and entered early development. Hillenburg shut it down. The episode was shelved permanently. Mrs. Krabs, in the canon of the show, is simply gone, and the reason for her absence has never been provided. The dark theory says she is in the patties. The argument, as it has been made on Reddit and on the SpongeBob fan wikis, runs as follows. Mr. Krabs went to war. The war left him in a deep depression. The Krusty Krab training video is explicit about this. He came back to Bikini Bottom carrying something heavy. Then, somewhere in his life, he met Mrs. Krabs, married her, and had Pearl. Mrs. Krabs disappeared. The whale photograph on his wall, the Moby Dick reference, is a clue. The Krabby Patty, the food that built his entire fortune, has a secret formula that has never been revealed. The Krusty Krab is named after Mr. Krabs, but the patty is named Krabby, not Crab. The pun in this reading is the wrong species. The patty is not crab meat. The patty is whale meat. Mrs. Krabs, Pearl's mother, was the source. Mr. Krabs has been grinding her body into the food he sells to the residents of Bikini Bottom for years. The theory is gruesome. It is also, by every official statement the show has ever issued, completely false. Vincent Waller, the showrunner, has stated multiple times that there is no meat in the Krabby Patty at all, no animal product whatsoever, and that Stephen Hillenburg specifically designed the patty to be a vegetable burger. Mr. Lawrence has said the same thing. The writers are not allowed to depict fish being eaten as food in most contexts. The Krabby Patty is, in canon, a meatless burger. The whale theory is fan fiction. The fact that the theory exists at all, however, says something about how the show's canon has been received. The pieces are all real. The Krusty Krab training video really does describe a deep, lasting depression. Mrs. Krabs really has been excluded from the show on purpose for over 25 years. The Moby Dick photograph really hangs on Mr. Krabs' wall in wet painters. The patty's secret ingredient really has never been revealed. Hillenburg really did refuse to allow Pearl's origin story to ever be filmed. The fans have taken these real pieces of canon, all of which point at gaps and absences in the official story, and they have filled the gaps with the darkest possible answer. The show, by refusing to provide its own answers, has left room for the fan base to invent worse ones. The same dynamic has produced other dark theories. Mr. Krabs as a serial killer, with the episode Nasty Patty as evidence, where Mr. Krabs disposes of what he believes to be a dead body with surprising calmness. Mr. Krabs as someone who tried to kill Squidward in Out of the Picture, where he attempted to bash his employee's head in with a mallet to inflate the value of his paintings. Plankton as a deeply tragic figure rather than a comedic antagonist, given his loneliness, his abusive marriage, and his decades of failure. Patrick as someone with antisocial personality disorder, given the casual cruelty he shows to other characters in many episodes. Mrs. Puff as someone with post-traumatic stress disorder from her years of having SpongeBob crash boats into her body. Each of these theories starts with real moments from the show and extends them into psychiatric territory the show itself never directly addresses. What the dark fan culture has built over the years is a parallel version of SpongeBob that lives next to the official one. The official version is bright, cheerful, and family-friendly. The fan version is post-apocalyptic, traumatic, and full of repressed violence. Both versions use the same evidence. The difference is the angle of approach. The show, by leaving so much unspoken and so many backstories unfilled, has invited the fan base to do the work of filling them. The fan base has done the work. The fan base has done the work in directions that Stephen Hillenburg, who hated the merchandising of the show and only wanted children to look more closely at tide pools, almost certainly never anticipated. That, in the end, is the strangest legacy of SpongeBob SquarePants. A quiet marine biology teacher from Anaheim built a comic book about a sponge in a tide pool. He turned it into a pitch. The pitch became a show. The show became a phenomenon. The phenomenon outgrew him, outlasted him, and is now, 8 years after his death, being expanded into Netflix feature films, prequel series, spin-offs, and merchandising deals he would have, by every account, hated. The original concept of the world he built was post-apocalyptic, set on top of the ruins of a nuclear testing site, populated by mutated survivors of a war that ended human civilization. The show walked away from that concept early on. The fans walked it back in the other direction, building a darker version of Bikini Bottom in their imaginations than the show itself ever quite committed to. The two versions, the cheerful one and the dark one, now coexist permanently. Every viewer carries some combination of both inside them. The pineapple under the sea is a pineapple under the sea. It is also, depending on how you read it, a small piece of survival lodged in the wreckage of a world that ended before any of us were born. If you enjoyed this video essay, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.